All right, great. We'll call it to order at 7 o'clock on the dot. We'll quickly go over our board norms. Maintain our focus, communicate respectfully, be present, keep the board productive and effective, and respect the agenda. And do we have any changes to the agenda?
I would just like to add
Yes,
a discussion about our buildings, like a building assessment, potential building assessment.
Building assessment.
That's something to consider. Kind of based off of Les's recommendation that we hire a professional. His was more specifically about building, but I was thinking maybe doing that in conjunction with an assessment of our buildings. Might be a good idea, provide some helpful information.
Yeah. Sure, let's make that D on new business. And can you just say it again? You were looking for
To consider an assessment of our existing buildings.
assessment of existing buildings. Okay.
We actually just had one not too long ago.
Yeah, we
Okay.
and since Sarah's new, we can.
Right, we'll fill you in on that.
Okay.
Did you
Good,
add it after
good.
I printed mine? No.
All right, thank you. Anything else? No?
Yeah, there is a new agenda than I printed.
All right.
Let's see.
Correspondence, we had some, but nothing to speak to of at this moment. So members of the public, I don't know, do we have any folks out there?
Behind you. Oh,
Hello, folks. Hello. Yeah, I'm sorry, I saw Peter, I'm like, oh, our IT guy. But yes, welcome.
Thank you.
If there's anything that you would like to speak to that is not on our agenda, certainly let us know now, we can speak to it. If not, we will wait till we get to that point on the agenda. All right, seeing none, let's move on to new business. And our first item is requested financial review by our great CFO, Laurie Garland.
All right, so you all asked for some data points from the last meeting and to span a 5-year period. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the whole packet, and then we'll dig in section by section, take it in bite-sized pieces. So the request was for ADM, cost per pupil, tax rates, yields, excess spending thresholds. So after watching the video and hearing what I think you're really looking for, I broke the information down into sections. So the first section doesn't have anything to do with the funding formula. So I heard that loud and clear from the video, that you just wanted to know what does it cost per student without mucking up the works with the funding formula. And then the second section is the funding formula, because you can't talk about the yield and you can't talk about tax rates and you can't talk about excess spending unless you talk about the funding formula. The third section is staffing. So you asked for staffing over the last 5 years. And then the fourth section is just a frequently used terms, which I thought would be helpful for everybody. We can refer to those. If I say EQPs, you can flip back there and find out what an EQP is. So let's talk about the first section. So I'm looking at this section in terms of a consumer, okay? So we are using ADM, which are the students, which is average daily membership. I keep trying to remind myself to say those, which are students in the seats. I heard that loud and clear. You wanted to know how many students were in the seats. So this has nothing to do with equalized pupils. And so the grid, if you flip over to section 1, the grid in green is the cost per student, and that's taking the actual expenditures or the actual revenues and minus the actual expenditures divided by the students in the seats. Okay? So what does that mean? So I'm gonna pick on Leanne because I know she has a student in West River, pre-K through 12 system, right? So in this system, at the end of this year, Leanne, I need you to write a check for $21,811 to West River to pay for your student's education. Okay, that's what it's going to cost per student. And everybody that has a student would need to pay that amount of money, right? Because we're not talking funding formula now. We're talking about consumers. So what are the goods and services that Leanne paid for with that $21,811? So the graph on the next page, or actually it's on the third page of this section, is a graph that you're used to seeing. It's in every budget presentation that I do. And it's a breakdown of the services or the functions by percentage. Now this is looking at fiscal year 23's projected budget or approved budget. But the percentages really haven't changed year over year that drastically. So I'm going to use those percentages, right? So let's just break down that $21,000. So $14,616 are going to go towards student learning and support, right? So that's your biggest two areas, 56% for direct student instruction. So that is your tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction. So your regular ed teachers, your academic support teachers, and your special ed teachers, all providing direct student instruction. And then 11% is student support services, which are the nursing and the guidance and library. I'm trying to think of all the, yeah, I think that's the main ones there. So then $1,962 is going to go towards keeping the building operating. Okay, so out of that $21,000, that goes to keeping the lights on and the building maintained. $1,527 for administration, $1,090 for board and assessment costs, $654 for athletics and co-curricular, $654 for transportation, $436 to feed Leanne's student, and $436 to debt. And then you're actually putting $436 per student into a savings account this year, or for fiscal year 23. So that's how the $21,000 breaks down. So let's stop here and look at this data, and does anybody have any questions? So now you asked for the data over 5 years. So, you know, we can look at this and say, you know, back in fiscal year 18, which is school year 18, I put the key on the side so you can, fiscal years and ADMs don't always line up. Peter and I are always going back and forth about that. Is this ADM or is it fiscal year? So Jamaica was spending $16,000 actual costs per student, then up to 17 the next year, and then you became a district-wide expense of 17,818. So not a huge increase there over time. Does anybody have any questions on this data?
I have.
First moment I looked at it, does that mean it's going up? I haven't studied it. Are the numbers continually going up?
Sure, the cost per student is
Raising.
definitely going up, yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. So this is the cost for every student in every grade level of the whole district, correct?
That is correct,
Okay.
including pre-K.
So it actually isn't actual what we're actual spending on each student, really.
Say that again?
We're not actually spending the $21,811
Per student?
per student.
So this data is, and I'm using the column for 22 and I'm estimating this is what it's going to cost. But let's step back and look at fiscal year 20, right? So that's the 2019, 2020, because those are baked in the cake. That is what you spent. You actually spent $11,279,459, right? And you had some revenue that offset that, some local revenue that offset that on the next page, 1.2 million there. That number divided by 561 is $17,818.
Okay. But it's not actually what we're spending on a student in Jamaica Elementary School. A third grader in Jamaica Elementary School, it's not costing us 21,000. It goes along with this theory of originally when we did all this studying, we weren't, because what we're doing now is we have one combined rate for the whole district.
Correct.
But in reality, it's because I went through this when we first started the district, and I was told I couldn't use those numbers because I was doing pretty much the same formula at the elementary level, and I was told that, but that's not what we're spending on a student. And it wasn't by you at all. Believe you weren't, because this was, it was. I was told by the committee that, and the person was supposed to look up all the numbers and make sure they were right, and for some reason they kept not doing it. But my point is here is the actual amount that we're spending on the student when we're saying we pay, X amount for direct instruction it's an average for all four schools.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's on the average. You're going to
So
spend
it could,
more on
if
one
we were
student
still
than
splitting it at this point, it would be the pre-K-5, how we used to do it for tax purposes, because we had up to 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had 7 through 12, middle high school, were two different numbers.
Right, I didn't split it by grade. I did it as a
But
whole
do you still
number.
have to do that for the state at the end of the year, is what I'm curious about.
I do.
And I would be interested to see what those numbers are at some point.
Yes, you are still a West River A and a West River B from my
Okay.
perspective, even
Right.
though you vote on one budget.
Right.
I have to report it.
Good question, Ken. Distinction? I like how you just broke it down, Laurie, with the 20. What part of 21,000 in terms of dollars is this for food, and it just kind of makes it more real in terms of.
Well,
what we're
it
spending money on.
really is looking at it as a consumer. This is what I'm paying for on the whole. But you're absolutely, Ken is right that, and not even breaking it down elementary, secondary. I mean, you have students that are going to cost a lot more than $21,000 if they're getting, certain services, and you'll have some that cost less. So this is obviously an average. Any other questions on section 1?
What is the revenue received? Where does that come from?
So the revenue received is, another word that we call it is offsetting revenue. And it's any local revenue, also local grants and that type of thing. So Leland and Gray takes in students, tuition revenue. So that's part of it. And some grant money is part of it. Interest up in the checking account, all of those things that are not part of the ed spending. I also, just for clarification, I didn't apply any reserves that you have used to this number because that's really a false, gives you a false number if you're adding in reserves. So it's really anything but the state money that comes in.
Okay.
Good, Peter.
Peter Broussard, senior at Leland and Gray, Newfane resident. And I apologize, I got in a little late. So we're paying more for lower number of students. Why? I mean, like thousands of dollars. This is the average, I know that. But on our average, we're paying more money for less students.
I can answer that question. That's easy, because if you have 100 students and your pay and your budget is $1 million, then you're dividing that by 100. If you have 80 students and you're dividing that by the million, you're going to have a large number. So the less students we have, if we keep everything the same and all our costs are the same, we're going to spend more money per student.
And then there are some,
I figured it out. Thank you.
and there are some costs like healthcare and everything that just seem to go up every year, no matter what we do.
No, it's a good question, Peter.
It's a good question.
So, and then second question, so 7% is going to the principal's office. What is that 7%? Why is 7% going to principals?
That's just Bill's salary.
It's the administrative costs, so it's not just yes, it says principal's office, but it's the entire administration cost, right? It's all of your administrators in the building, all of your support for the administrators in the building, all of the costs of doing business. That's what it comes down to.
Things like graduation expenses are part of the principal's budget.
Okay.
Postage for mailing things,
all
all
of that.
part of the principal's budget.
Right.
Okay.
Great
Question?
Yeah.
And to sort of follow up on that, Peter, because the board costs are, also 5%, right? So the board's costs are all of the legal fees that, come through and the audit that has to be done every year. And then there is an assessment for the central office staff, people paying the bills that come in and recording the tuition receipts and that type of thing, all of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Moving on to section 2. All right. First, did that sort of satisfy what you were looking for as far as what I heard on the video? Or not
Probably.
yet? Not yet? Some more things to look up. Okay, section 2. So let's talk about the yield first. There was a question on the 4th about the yield and what the yield does, right? So it's on the frequently used term sheet at the back of the packet, but the yield is out of your control, right? Everybody understands that you have no control over what number that is, but it's what really sets the tax rate. It's set to generate enough property tax revenues to support anticipated statewide spending after all the other ed fund revenues are accounted for. Okay, so that's why the yield was higher this year, because the other ed revenues were higher than what was estimated. So sales tax, that's what most people are saying. That's where the 95, I think it's up to now, almost 100. Surplus came from is sales tax. So they didn't need as much to make up the, they didn't need to set the yield low to raise taxes, right? So that's where the yield actually changes and is going to change probably in the next 3 weeks or so. And it always changes, and so I did put that on there. That is on page, I don't know, it's the 3rd page in on your section 2. So, because I thought this was interesting for you to understand that, again, the yield has been right around $10,000 or $11,000, right? So that's why I've always used $11,000 for the yield. This year it came in at $12,937. So, and that was the conservative yield. If you remember correctly, there were 2 numbers. One was almost 14,000.
Missing the 3rd page.
But you can see that by the time June 30th and budgets are starting to be set, tax rates are starting to be set, that yield can change, right? And that's the bill in the House right now, that the yield bill is what they call it. And so right now that's expecting to actually go up. So we'll see what happens with that. Somewhere around 13.5, I think, is what I've heard. Which is unheard of, but that's something that, you know, when you're planning for doing some long-term planning and you're doing, you know, projecting out tax rates, really to use about $11,000 yield is more in line with where it's been. And then,
Laura, do you think that they will go backwards? I mean, over the years, I think it's continuing to go up 2.5%, 3% every year. Has it actually ever slid back?
yeah, look at 18 and fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19.
They went back like 2, 3.
So it's really all dependent on what's going on in the ed fund, really. So that's when the commissioner sets the rate when, so I report very early on what I think budgets are going to do. So at the beginning of this budget cycle, the average was something like budgets were going to go up 3.4%. Well, in our SU, we blew that out of the water. We had Marlboro going up 23%, right? So you can see where that will change over time based on those numbers that actually come in. So, and the budget collection is due June 1st, in a month. And that's when they'll really know what that yield should be. All right, so then the other thing to look at is the excess spending, right? That was a question that everybody had. And so, you know, I have a chart here for excess spending. So we know that, working backwards, we know that there's most likely going to be about a 5-year moratorium on that, which is wonderful, works in your favor. You can see West River as a whole has had an excess spending penalty. This is all per student, per pupil. And in 19, Townsend did, Leland and Gray did, and then in 18, Leland and Gray did. But what these data points don't show you is a couple things. So they don't show you the individual districts, where they were at actually in fiscal year 18. Both Jamaica and Townsend were cutting their budgets, and Al can remember this. Not sure who was on the Jamaica board, but they were both cutting their budgets. They both were reducing services and using their fund balance to stay under that threshold. And Townsend couldn't quite make it that next year, right? So they did pay a penalty. So all of those were going on in those years. Leland and Gray had 0 in reserves in 18. And for the fiscal year 18 budget, which is the first budget Bob and I worked on together, they had a previous year deficit that we had to add to the budget. for fiscal year 18. Which I want to give a shout out to Bob because he actually turned that 18 budget into a surplus at the end. So, do you remember that? All those years ago?
Good job, Bob.
And Newbrook in fiscal year 19 ended with a significant deficit that they brought into the West River District. So all of that was going on, which data points don't tell you about. And I think it's important to understand the climate and where everything was in those first couple of years before the merger. So does anybody have any questions on this? I know it's a lot of numbers and it's a lot of data, but I think it's, I think it tells a pretty good story of where the tax rate has been and where it has gone, how the CLA plays into it. Well, can I just keep rolling? Sorry. So what was interesting to me was.
Sorry, Peter.
Oh, sorry, Peter.
So question, I see Windham in some of these and then not in others. So why?
So Windham is part of West River, secondary, but not primary.
Okay.
So the equalized pupils numbers and the CLAs, those are easy to get, but putting Windham into the cost per student in the first section doesn't make sense. So I did add them where I could and where it made sense to add them as part of the union.
Okay, and so sorry, I still don't. So what do you mean by Windham is part of the secondary and not the primary? What does, I don't know exactly what that means.
Sure, so Windham is its own school district.
Okay.
Right, it did not choose to join West River. So their elementary is still their own school district. But they are part of the secondary and their students come to Leland and Gray. So that's why they have a split tax rate because of that.
It splits on, Windham is unique in that it splits, their elementary goes K through 6, and their secondary is 7 through 12, even though West River has secondary from 6 through 12.
Yes.
So that complicates it even more, which is why you won't see them reported consistently throughout everything because of that unique split.
So what I thought was interesting was how close that the equalized pupils, the cost per pupil, so this is on same in the tax formula related data points. The cost per pupil for 22, the year we were talking about in the first section, is $21,011, right? And that's using equalized pupils. I thought that was interesting that it was so close. And then I remembered that the legislation was passed to keep the school year 2019-2020 ADM as the basis for the equalized pupil. So that's also giving you a little bit of false security because eventually, well, the law may change, so I'm not sure what'll happen at this point, but those ADMs will eventually drop off, is what would happen. Under normal circumstances, your next year would be a more realistic ADM count. So.
And that was a function of the state trying to provide some assistance to school districts as during COVID, as
Right.
a lot of families went homeschool, so that it wouldn't be a sudden drop in revenue. That was about.
So Laurie, the FY '23 budget, which looks like a pretty steep jump from FY '22, is in part that steep because that number was, that FY '22 number wasn't really,
Right, the average is going down because the hold on the ADM is starting to drop off. Yeah. That's part of it, right? So you can see the equalized pupils, went down 12 equalized pupils there. So that's part of it. Part of it is just increased costs with the higher yield. And this is where it gets very confusing, right? So because there was a higher yield, things like building maintenance, there was about $150,000 put in for building maintenance for all the buildings, where in past years, they haven't been able to do that, right? But because there was a higher yield, if you look at the tax rate, it was a penny off from the previous year.
And so if we had a normal yield, our FY '22 and '23 would probably be looking more like 24 or 25,000, right?
Right, I think I provided that data when I did the budget presentation. I said, because I wanted to always keep that in the forefront, that the yields, has generally been about $11,000. So this blip in the system, it's just like the CLA, right? The CLA's dropped. So that offsets some of the yield going up. Had that not happened, your cost per student would probably be even lower than last year, had the, CLA not been factored in. Any other questions on section 2? Okay. Section 3 is staffing. So the request was 5 years of staffing, all staff, no matter how they are funded, and even throw in some contracted service providers. Okay, which that became a little, I had to do some best judgments there, but I did add in some of those as well. So in 2018 and 2019, this was prior to your merger, and we were in a different accounting system, and special ed was tracked back to the school. Okay, so those are important distinctions to make, because I can clearly say Jamaica had 10 in their building and Windham Central was assigning them 5. So it was pretty clear. In fiscal year 20, the board, and I have all of the information about it on the second sheet. The WCSU board voted to share special ed costs. Okay, so it's no longer based on buildings, but based on student need. So employees were deployed based on student need. If, Townsend needed 1.5 special educators this year, but maybe Newbrook needed, 1.5 the next year. So that was not tracked anymore. So that's why you'll see this big increase in where it says WRED and it says WCSU and WRED assigned. So that's the distinction there. It's a shared, basically all of the schools are sharing those resources and they're deployed where they need to go for that year. So it stayed actually pretty steady. And then in fiscal year 22, bit of a jump there from 21. We went from a contracted transportation for special ed to hiring special ed drivers. So I didn't include the contracted special ed drivers because there were several districts in one car of students, right? So I didn't pick that apart. But we added on our payroll special ed drivers and also some federally funded positions in '22. And again in '23, that's been expanded, and also special ed added some staffing for student need, as well as academic support. So you can see where the jump is from, not necessarily from your local budgets, but more from federal funding. Some of it is local. You remember you put in a new position for Journey East. There was a maintenance position in the West River budget. I think those were the two main ones. And then you're sharing in that 7.95% of special ed that was increased. They just want me to go away.
And the light.
I can tell.
And the light bill.
The lights go out. She's done.
Maybe this will get her stopped.
Yeah, really. Any questions on staffing? We got questions out there.
Oh, I don't know who was first. Let's see.
Okay. So the switching the staff members from working directly in the school to then putting it under the union, is that changing costs at all? Is that changing the what money is being used for those staff members?
No, it's just a matter of, in our accounting system, in fiscal year 18 and 19, we tracked back to the building. And then in 20, we only track whether it's a primary special educator or a secondary special educator, right? So it's not really tracked to a particular building, but rather tracked to, really, you're paying a percentage of the entire special ed bill based on your ADM for West River, which is like 60%. Well, I'm using round numbers, but so the $6 million that we spend on special ed, West River is assessed around 60% of that.
Okay.
Do any of your numbers about this special ed stuff include, or is it built in for tuitioned out kids to special programs?
Yes.
Do you have any
So
sense?
these are staff. So are they, if you're asking, are staff members part of this for tuitioned out? No. The cost is, because we wouldn't have staff if we tuitioned out a student to, Kindle Farm, we'll say.
Well, that's what I'm thinking about. If we tuitioned out kids rather than hiring staff, and would that be more cost effective for us or not?
Well, that's a question for the special ed director. Because it's more to do with access to education. And it's not, cost-wise, I can give you those numbers, but it may not be in the best interest of the student.
Thank you.
Plus transportation.
Yes, plus transportation, that's right. You have to include transportation when you tuition students out.
Laurie, do you have any sort of breakdown of what the staff in the building or WCSU in general would be in terms of what percentage of that is teaching staff versus paras versus administration versus special ed teachers? Do you have any sort of breakdown of what that has it like been a huge increase, say, in when we see between 2020 and 2021, there's a pretty significant jump there, and I'm wondering, like, just for instance, other places too, but is that jump suddenly a huge special ed increase happened that, we're required to cover this, we have to do this? Is it completely out of our hands, or is it like, well, we chose to add some extra administrators and an extra teaching position and, you know, like, I was trying to get a gauge of what is happening with those increases.
Right, so, you know, I think that if you look at it starting from 18, you're seeing some decreases, right?
Sure.
Right, so, and I do think special ed is probably the place where you're going to see these increases and decreases because it's based on student need. So, you know, you have a student that moves in that needs a one-to-one. That's an increase, right away.
Right.
And so I think that the majority of the increases is probably due to special ed.
But it's not something that's been specifically like looked at. We can't say, you know, in general, the increase is this percentage to teaching staff and this percentage to special ed or whatever.
Right. No, I don't have that
Okay.
broken down.
Okay.
Do we want that?
But I would say that, Laurie, you do that every single year. You outline, you have here's where we see the pluses and minuses.
Right.
So that's done on a yearly basis. So what you're asking is if
Right.
you would see it over time.
Yeah,
And
just
it
to
is
add
done,
that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just, if it's something that, because it's something that's somewhat available, I would love to see that, just to have a better understanding of what that staffing change means.
Okay.
Because it's one thing to say that there was a change, but it's not very descriptive of why.
Okay. Yeah, and in your local budgets, you know what you're increasing, right? So did we increase any teaching staff this year in your local budget?
Sure.
And, well,
But
not
it's
really.
just- this is also for the public, right? I mean,
And
well, we
we-
added the Journey East, right?
Right.
So my guess, the point, one of the big reasons that we're doing this exercise is so that we have a concise document for the public to understand where we are and what's going on, right? And so I feel like that is a good way to qualify what is happening. We have quantities, but what does it mean?
Right, I agree with you. I think that in the same way that we broke down the dollars, that $21,000, is that acceptable to break it down? Because are you wanting like your core teachers, your tier 1 teachers, and then you want your tier 2 special educators broke down, and then, because it's all direct instruction, it's all serving the students.
I mean, I would like to see, you know, direct teachers versus paras and, you know,
Okay.
sort of second tier versus special ed versus administration. I don't know if there's another category you feel inclined to add to that, but.
And maintenance.
Sure.
And all of
Yes.
that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about all of the different areas, functions
Yeah.
of the thing. Okay, I get that.
Thanks.
But one of the things that you might want to have in mind too, particularly as you're thinking at the elementary level, is that, you know, the special education laws, it says that we need to instruct kids in the least restrictive environment. And, you know, are there ways of providing services that might support kids and give them the support that they need in an environment where it also benefits the typical children as well, you know, in more inclusive settings. Now, you probably do that to a fairly significant degree already, but, you know, if there were ways to build that in as a model and sort of increase the number of students who are served in that way, and they can be served appropriately, then you can be extending the support pretty more widely.
Yeah, I agree with you, Les, and this is all part of the MTSS model that we have been implementing over. And some of the reason that the staffing has gone up, of course, it's federally funded, so I think that's another point of clarification, Lindsay, that maybe I need from you, is, you know, do we want to separate it out by federally funded versus locally funded, right? Because when you look at this number of 144 for fiscal year 23, that doesn't correlate to that $21,000 number, or whatever that number is, because there's federally funded people in this 144, right?
Right.
But that is part of what we're working towards with investing in. A lot of our grant money has gone into academic support and providing those in the least restrictive settings.
Laurie, question. I'm just gonna use 22 here for, and I think I know the reason, just correct me, because it looks like it's off. Number of staff members in the building. Okay, for Jamaica, you got 3.5, right? Okay, which we understand there's a small population there, that's why. Whereas Newbrook, if you look on the other sheet, it says there's 87 in Newbrook and 64 in Townsend. And Newbrook has 9 and Townsend has almost 16 FTEs. Okay,
Where-
and the reason for that, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're also including the 27 pre-K, so you also have a couple of pre-K teachers and aides there also, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's why, okay. It's just that if somebody looked at that, they'd go, hey, wait a minute. you know.
Nope, that is exactly right.
Equity, where's the equity?
Only for 2 towns, Ken.
Jamaica's an oddball on that one.
Any other questions for Laurie? And do you have enough to go on to dig into the categories?
So what I heard was just breaking down now, how many years back? I mean, are we just talking about?
Just for what's here is fine. I mean, let's just take the data that is already here and maybe qualify it
Category.
Into categories.
Into categories, yeah.
Okay.
Laurie, it would be good to know what's federally supported and what's
Yeah,
locally
definitely.
supported in case the feds decide to kill the support. We have to pick up the tab. It would be nice to be forewarned.
Right, well, that is, some of this is ESSER money, so it's gonna go away. It's not your Title I. It is partly your Title I, Title IIA, and Title IV, but there's a lot of ESSER money, which is why you're seeing the bigger increases in staffing.
And everything here is right from the direct instruction line, right? Or is it direct instruction plus
No, we haven't.
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
the numbers that you have, a number of employees.
Number of staffing?
If I were to look at the budget, is it direct instruction?
No, so this is all staff.
Everything,
This
okay.
is down to, yes, everything.
Clerks and janitors.
That's
So I'm
right.
just wondering, all right, so whatever that is, if we took the budget and the actuals for these time periods and just ran it across as well, just to have a dollar view of it
Okay.
as well.
For fiscal year '23.
To see.
Just for clarity, for
Yeah.
the public to understand where we're at.
Right, so the paras and the special ed is what is gonna come in as an assessment, right? Remember, that's a line item, so that's not salaries and benefits and that type of thing. But we can say there's X amount of, yeah, okay. I think I'm on to what you want.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Laurie.
Bob, can you check to see if there are any questions from the audience?
If they had hands up, I believe they would come to the front here. I'm not seeing any.
All right. Thank you very much, Laurie.
You're welcome.
That was great, as usual. Okay, moving on to the task force report out. Who would love to do it?
Is that PowerPoint in a presentation mode?
It is, yep.
I can't seem to be clicking it.
Oh, it worked.
Here we go.
That's me doing that though.
Tricky.
So just keep going.
You gonna keep going?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, you got it.
I'm getting it now. Okay, so here we are, elementary task force update.
Yep, the elementary task force has met twice. Our second meeting was just prior to this one. We had developed a plan of strategy mostly within our first meeting and went over some areas where we were, what we wanted to know. What issues do we want to address? And then we have broken it down into categories by school as far as available resources, the infrastructure, pros and cons of different configurations. I think we're working on 5 different ones that we wanted to, 5 or 6. It was 5 or 6. 2 of them are really close together. And today we mostly spent time going through Jamaica School and its current configurations, finding what works in the school, what doesn't work in the school, and just other things to take into consideration as we're moving forward. And we plan to hit Townsend and Newbrook in our next meeting. We were a little late starting today because we had some technical difficulties, but we still all had to be out of there at the same time, so didn't accomplish quite as much as we were hoping to. So nothing major to report back yet, just that we're reviewing it. We've got a strategy for reviewing it, using the Miro board to find out what people in the community are really looking for in the elementary school. And we also have quite a big group, so there's lots of input from.
I think there's about 12.
I think so.
It was bigger than we thought it was going to be.
So we have many community members, many teachers,
Which is
a couple
good.
administrators, board members. It's a big group and a pretty diverse group. So
One interesting fact that someone mentioned, I have not verified this, but we are possibly one of the most geographically spread out districts in the state.
Second largest. Yeah.
Okay. Which is making part of the difficulties I think that we're running into.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the mirror board?
The one,
Was that
we've
for the-
looked at it, we've all,
Yeah.
Miro, M-I-R-O,
Yeah,
did I say that
I
right?
know, I'm sorry, this is for the
Okay.
the folks out there.
This was the where folks were invited to go online and post their ideas of what the school will look like in the future. So we're using those inputs, or plan to use those inputs, we haven't quite gotten there yet, as we're reviewing all the information. And see what we can come up with.
That's great, thank you.
So when you come back to the board next month, you.
We should have a bit more.
Expect to have a breakdown of about 5 different organizational models and what some of the pros and cons would be for each of those?
yes, that's the goal.
That's great.
Just a quick question. Is there a note taker? Like, are there minutes
Peter's been
that
on
we
taking
can?
minutes for us.
Oh, do you know where those are?
Suzanne?
We don't post them, so.
They are on, so if you go to agendas and minutes, we
Yep.
actually just recently reorganized all this with the help of Meg Wright. If you go to the minutes folder, they're now organized by red board, long-term planning, and that has subfolders that have the elementary and the secondary task force minutes and agendas in them. So
Oh.
it should, you have to go through a couple clicks, but it should be in there eventually once it gets approved.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Another question here.
All right. Can't see the name.
Patty,
Patty.
Sorry, thank you. And Patty, you're muted if you're talking.
I don't
There we
know
go.
where I am on my iPad, so
There
you
you
probably
go.
can't see my face. So now, are you actually going to show the public the results of the survey, or is it just, are you just using those as a tool to come up with certain scenarios?
We're using them as a tool, but I think they already are public.
Yeah, the merit board is already posted on our website, so all of that information that was gathered previously is already available for your reading enjoyment.
Okay.
It's intense. And we will also be using that and then reporting back.
Okay, I hadn't seen that, so I'll have to go hunt for it.
I can give a little of a bit of a help there. If you go to the future planning side of the website, there's a timeline that's sort of being populated.
Okay.
And all of those responses are in the February-March section.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And that's westrivered.org.
Yeah, I've been to the site. I thought tonight there would be a presentation about the results of the survey. And so I hadn't looked for it. So, okay, thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Patty.
Patty, those, we did talk about the results of that survey a bit at our last long-term planning meeting, so you could watch the video of that.
Yeah, I think I was there. You know, I was online for that, but as I recall, there was something about it that you weren't quite done with calculating everything, but I'll go through that. Okay, thank you.
We are going to touch on that.
So you put it off till this meeting, as I recall, but.
Yes, there will be something later in the agenda. We'll come back to the survey a bit.
All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just a question for the elementary group is, are you able to collect any data around academic achievement for students at the?
I'm sure we can. We have not yet looked at academic achievement and individual.
We haven't even gotten to that part of it yet. It's going to be a challenge to try and get this done by the deadline because there is so much information to go through.
That's an understatement.
Getting to 3 schools, not
All right. Any other questions, or we'll move on to the timeline?
So our secondary.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Wow. Short shrift. What am I doing? Secondary. Yeah.
Crystal is, I think, in Zoom land. Crystal, do you want to report out on that, or do you want me to say something?
You can go ahead and talk to it.
You're so shy, Crystal. All right. We have only met once last week.
Okay.
Got our hands full.
So we met last week, was the first one. It was all on Zoom based on the need that I had to be out of the building. This Wednesday afternoon at 3, we're coming back for the hybrid version in the conference room upstairs. We took the charge that the board gave us pretty literally, and maybe we shouldn't have, I don't know, but we created our agenda based on that paragraph and the delineated elements of what we were asked to do. So the first thing that we attacked Wednesday was to talk about our existing programming. And so obviously we have, maybe not as big as group as the elementary group, I'm not sure, but there was 6 or 8 of us. And we basically reviewed the high school because we sensed that a lot of this was really more angled around the choice stuff at the high school versus the middle school. We really focused in on the high school and really went pretty thoroughly through the program studies and described what we offered, how we offer it, what options kids have. And Crystal, you can jump in here, but I was at the end of the whole conversation. We asked for questions, and Crystal spoke up and just said how surprised and pleased she was with how much we actually did offer, that she had no idea was actually happening here. So we talked a little bit about PR and how we're not very good at talking about what we do, but we talked about the example someone had said in a meeting here a month or so ago about how Leland Gray should have some kind of an internship program. It's like, well, we've had an internship program here for 30 years. So we talked a little about how can we get better at sort of getting out that word and about what the things are that we're doing. But yeah, that's where we started. And so the next phase was to talk about how to improve on those offerings, I believe. And then after that, it was to get into the choice variables around how that works. And I saw Les had sent an email that described some of the definitions that we would probably need to suss out, so people are, because there's a lot of confusion around high school choice versus tuitioning and how those things are different. And so we would delineate that a little bit as well. And then we prepare our report for you guys. So we really took it fairly literally. I don't know if that's what we're supposed to do, but if there's more detail that you guys want us to delve into, please let us know. I think that we just went through that paragraph and divided it into steps, basically.
I would love to bounce Les's question from the elementary task force to you guys about addressing sort of academic achievement and how that, and not just in terms of like what are we offering and could we offer more, but how are those offerings going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is it that you guys? I mean, you want like comps?
A lot of the things that we've heard in the community feedback has to do with a perceived, again, this whole PR thing, well, we know that's real, but a perceived lack of quality. And I guess just some way to address that, like here's where we are, here's how we compare. I don't know what exactly, I know there's just been a lot of rumblings about not just necessarily the types of offerings, but the quality of those offerings.
Yeah, so we can talk about what data points we should be looking at. I mean, it's been, with COVID, there was a year without SBACs and things like that, but we could maybe do a little bit more historical, but also some recent. I mean, we can try to figure out what we're looking at. Is there anything in particular you want to make sure is included in that? Or just want us to kind of talk through what the data points might be?
Yeah, you're the teacher, you're the administrator. I trust you to present that in a way that is understandable for the wide world.
Yeah, and I think this is also a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about one of the data points I know has come up on the survey or in earlier board meetings where there was a community member who said that they had seen a study, some data point they had found online that Leland and Gray had a 0% college and career readiness, which came supposedly from some official AOE. I mean, I don't even know how that happens, but I'm assuming that the AOE didn't report out correctly. So things like that. I mean, how can you have a 0%? I mean, I don't know what indicators are even using to identify that, but we took it on ourselves the year just before COVID started to ensure that we had a 100% placement rate in careers or college or military at graduation. And at graduation, we read what each kid is doing, and it's been kind of a cool thing. So we have 100% college and career readiness because we're putting kids in college and career. So things like that again, I don't know if it's a PR thing, but it was so data points get thrown around, and it's hard to, without being able to respond to them, it's hard to really know. So I'll try to work with the community to figure out what data points are worth showing, and maybe try to explain what they are.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about that. So okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other things?
I know you haven't presented it yet, but the PBL, the project-based learning stuff, how is that affecting into your task force? I mean, you've been waiting to give us a presentation on it.
We're so close last week. So close. Yeah, we'll I think do that in May with you guys, and that will. I mean, that's part of the step 2 of how do we improve things that we have is that's part of that. So we'll be sure to highlight that when we talk.
Yeah, I just want to say, just as a student, don't trust what the SBACs say when you're thinking about, because I mean, or if you do want to use the numbers, then there's the caveat of a large number of students just don't care and don't take them seriously. So they are not, unfortunately, they are not reflective of most students' abilities.
Except for you, Peter, you did well, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge, having been a secondary person for a lot of years. That's been a challenge in every place I've been, is secondary students don't take it as seriously as elementary. But that kind of equalizes, because every secondary school is similar, so, it depends how you incentivize things. But anyways, no, I appreciate that, Peter. It's yeah, we don't want to put all the eggs in one basket for sure. There's lots of other data points that we could use, including things around climate and culture, things like that too, so, yeah.
I was just gonna say, one of those data points should be how students feel about things,
Yep. We do annual surveys on that as part of our continuous improvement planning, so we have data going back since I've been here anyways on that, so we can talk about that. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
That would be really useful to have. Is there also a way to look at some data for some comparable high schools, and look at both the post secondary outcomes for kids, look at the offerings that you're able to provide versus some other schools, AP courses or online courses or whatever.
Yep. See what we can do.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Crystal, did I capture everything correctly?
Yes. Sorry, my beagle is going crazy.
No.
Fair enough.
All right, let's see, before we jump.
Timeline.
Oh yes, timeline, yeah. Let's see the timeline. Suggested timeline.
There have been a couple of requests to map out a timeline for the work into the fall, and I've put something together and shared it with a few folks and with Suzanne today, and she contributed to it. So I'd like to throw this out here for your consideration. Our meeting today tonight is really to just get an update on the status of where finances, enrollment, the work of the task forces, et cetera, are. And then we have the task force reports coming in at our next meeting in June. At that point, the groups are going to be presenting what they found and any of their recommendations. We'll be able to have some discussion around that, provide some feedback. And at that point, we thought it would be important to organize a set of community meetings to share what that thinking is with the wider community. You'll see on this chart some red, and all of the red are things that Suzanne has added around communications. So Suzanne, you might want to speak to that a bit as we're going through this. Do you want to say anything about the thinking around communications in June?
So once the task force reports, I think the first step will be a press release into the Commons and Informer to let people know what these kind of a basic overview of what they decided, what they reported, and then information about these community meetings so that we can get as many people there as possible to give feedback. Yeah, so I guess there's just 2 checkpoints where we do that. So after the task force reports and then after the final plan sort of comes together in August, there would be in September with the community as well. Yeah, so that's where that's at.
So the idea being to do that during June while most families are still here, and then moving into the summer to begin working on the organizational plan for FY24. and at the July meeting to review the feedback from the community, to see what additional data is going to be helpful, and to collect some additional data to look more closely at facilities, if they're going to be a recommendation to do any sort of consolidation, and thinking about where should that consolidation be cited, and so on. And we're assuming that there are going to be fewer people in attendance over the summer, so we're going to stretch that out for 2 months, July and August, come back to that in August again, looking at the additional feedback and trying to finalize the organizational plan at that first meeting in August. During that time, continuing to inform the community through newsletters, et cetera, possible mailings. And then in September, beginning to flesh out a budget to support whatever changes you're recommending. And that, as Suzanne mentioned, would be another time to reach out to the community, to have some additional community meetings and feedback sessions, with a goal of being able to finalize budget recommendations by the beginning of October. So that's ambitious. It's a lot of work that is going to fall on the shoulders of the task forces, but it's giving a little flexibility over the summer to start filling in some additional information, some gaps. So that's what we're suggesting, and how does that work with your schedule, your sort of view of the pace of the work?
Did we lose our Fiona Luella community outreach team, or did they still into it?
They are still there.
Okay.
And my vision is that they would help facilitate those community meetings. That's what happened in June and September. But I think definitely for the June meeting, we'd need some task force board members there, just for answering questions, hearing feedback, kind of important.
So I would just like to emphasize that we've previously had committees do a bunch of work, and then the board decides that the board needs to do the work. And so I don't want to, again, have work put on committees instead of the board. I feel like when the committees report back on June 6th that everything should be happening at a greater board level because of the inability to find consensus otherwise. Unless we're having the conversations all together and moving forward all together, we're not moving forward.
So you're saying, I just want to make sure I understand, so when you your committees bring stuff on the 6th,
So there was a lot of talk about, oh, it's gonna be a lot of work for the committees until the 6th, and then it's gonna be a lot of work for everybody, because it has to be everybody that is making the decisions. And just, all of the, community meetings and all of that needs to be, I think.
we all need to be invested.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Exactly.
Be there.
Everybody needs to participate in all that.
There, or as many as can be.
Yep.
Great point.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else, Les?
No, if not, this sounds agreeable. We can.
Oh, I'm gonna hand.
Patty Dixon again.
Thank you.
It's me again.
Hi, Patty. Definitely.
Another quick question. How are you going to monitor how your community outreach is working? And at what point will you change, like say decide maybe to send out a card to people so you know it's going right to a home and it will be read because it's coming through the mail, etc.? Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. So how will we know if we're successful? I guess that's kind of the gist of the question.
Yeah. How will you monitor as you're going along what your communication results are, as far as, are you really getting to people? Are people reading the information? Are they seeing it? Should there be a change or add a new kind of communication design in? Because if you don't get the community involved, then it's not going to work. So I'm just wondering what the options are, so you'll know.
Definitely agree, Patty. And I'm excited for all of the different methods and means of communication that not people that are much smarter than me have come up with, like the postcard and the newsletter has been great. And then, if we do press releases, I think certainly at least a measure of success would be if Bob doesn't get some of the questions that he does in terms of, hey, do we offer this? We've answered all of that. It's out in the public, and people know everything that we do. And we've just done a better job of PR for actually what we do offer. And then also having solicited all of the feedback from you folks, taking that and filtering it and distilling what can we move forward with and what should we, based on all of your community engagement. I think that would feel like success. I don't know if others. Yes, go ahead.
So far, what I've heard from this part of the discussion was that this is all visual. And I would like to suggest very directly to you, sir, that the community be involved in a kinesthetic way. They tour the facility, they come to events, and that's how you generate the interest, and that's how you validate your interest, not by letters and newsletters and postings and things like that, but involvement, engagement, active eye-to-eye conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Wes is writing it down. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say, I don't know. I mean, a lot of folks on the board are alum, but it's an interesting question. But are there buildings even, other than the people that did the tours of the long-term plan thing, I remember, has all the board members been in all the buildings? I think that's a great question. When I was served on a board in Dummerson, I was a resident, every new board member got a tour. It was part of the deal. You had to get a tour of the building. Only one building, but that was part of what we did. So something to think about as far as new board orientation, maybe as far as some sort of tour, but to the public as well is a great point. But even start with the board. Let them see what's going on. Yeah.
As a side note to that, when the previous long-term planning committee did tour the buildings, and it was great. It was really, really, really helpful. So
the only downside to that is that you guys toured it with the facilities manager, not with the people who actually know what's going on educationally.
Yeah, there were some questions that didn't.
Nothing against Greg, but that was a different. It was just a different challenge because I got questions. I'm like, what? The what room? Like, no, the room was empty. Like, that's Peter's. That's a SEIT officer. Well, why was it empty? Well, because the people weren't working; they were home. Like, those kinds of things. Just good to have, have it shown either during the school day or by people that are in it in an operating way. So, yeah.
Great idea. Ideas. All right. Any other questions? All right. Assessment of existing buildings. So Sarah, great point. So we have done that, or the engineers came in. Was it 2019, Bob? 18, 19? Something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
18 and 19.
And did a very extensive review of the buildings. And we've taken action out of some of the steps and things that they had asked for. For example, this building has now been assessed to have another useful life of 10 to 15 years, right? So that kind of certainly took some of the heat off of us to try to find an immediate solution, either rebuilding here or finding something else that kind of feels like a a somewhat comfortable timeline of 10 to 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
We can't get too comfortable.
Right, it's not
It'll
that
creep up on
long,
us,
yeah.
Yeah, so in addition to that, kind of talking about the engineering of all of the buildings, it was an assessment of cost per building. If we were to take care of all of these different things within each of the buildings, it would cost X. Okay.
They were done
Wayne
in
has it.
2018.
2018.
Are those on the website?
Are they
Yeah, I
looking
found
at
them
them?
today.
Oh,
so.
cool, okay.
It was hard though, so we may want to bring them forward somehow.
Yep.
And as a note to that, doesn't Greg have like a fancy spreadsheet of
He
things
does.
that, he showed it, right? That things that
He's done his own
are on
assessment.
that list and how we're addressing it or the timeline for addressing it? And that would be a great thing to post for
That
people
one I
to
could
see.
not find. I'm sure it's there
What
somewhere.
needs to be done in these buildings. He's prioritized
Yeah,
how
that-
he wants the capital improvements for the next umpteen years.
Yeah.
So,
You're right. That was last summer?
6 months ago.
Or was it that?
Yeah,
okay.
January.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, you're right, that's
Yeah.
it's a great point.
So that would
So-
be something that would be important, I think, for everybody to have access to be in an easily searchable place, and certainly for the members of the task force to be looking at as well.
I just want to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection from when the engineer came was that if we tackled things like the columns that we're dealing with and all that, I think 10 to 15 years was not a final life. It was like we could maintain this building for a lot longer if we're going to maintain the building. You know, so just throwing that out there so people know.
Yeah,
You know,
agreed.
Yeah, and there's an assessment there on the website. Again, it was a little difficult to find when I looked for it for every building that we maintain in the district.
Oh, great, okay. And I'm wondering about things like, that sounds like from a facilities maintenance standpoint?
It was a capital needs assessment.
Okay. Because I'm also worried about just like informing what the task forces are doing, and when we get to a point where we're gonna decide, are we gonna consolidate, are we leaving things as they are we gonna have high school, are we not gonna have high school? Just having a better idea of exact like building capacity, and like I remember the last long-term planning committee had a plan in place and then discovered kind of late in the game that the, I think it was the Townsend,
The sewer.
the sewers, was not able to support the capacity, and they had to switch their plan kind of last minute. And so if we have that, just make sure we have all the information in place to be able to make decisions without running into unexpected issues.
I think that's a great point, and since everybody's kind of comfortable with that particular section of our, long-term planning, maybe we could have long-term planning and then facilities information or some kind of subsection. Or,
Yeah. And when I was looking for those documents, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
some of this was already done during the way back in the WRED study. Some of this information is already on file for capacities of buildings. I accidentally stumbled across it looking for those other reports.
So when would be a timeline to update an assessment typically? Is it
Yeah.
every 5 years, every 10 years? Because what happened in 2018 might change over time. So what would be the common practice of a reassessment?
Oh, you mean like another engineering?
Another engineering study or, yeah. You do it once.
That study went out almost 20 years for capital needs. And, it is kind of the spreadsheet that the other spreadsheet talked about is sort of the living document of what's being done and where things are being allocated and what needs attention now. But the engineering study, that was out 20 years. I would imagine once we finish it, in another 20 years or so, we might be looking at another engineering study unless we find something major or, we're concerned about something specific. But I don't see like we have to have an engineering study updated every 5 years by bringing an engineer in for another 50 grand.
Right, just wonder what common practice would be. 20 years, 20 years.
Well, is that something we should have someone kind of look at that information and maybe even provide a report that is easily accessible, so when we're looking at the specifics of what kind of choices we want to make. We have all that information on hand.
Oh, yeah. No, I think we're all saying the same thing, but yeah. In the long-term planning section of the site, very easily, readily available facilities information. It could be the engineering studies, it could be, and it should be Greg's capturing of what we've done, where we're at, the living document, yeah.
The engineering study was pretty accessible.
Okay.
I mean, I was able to grasp everything that was going on with it, so I feel like most people should be able to. Pretty good idea.
Yeah, it wasn't difficult to read.
Yeah, it wasn't written in jargon.
And do we think it's realistic that we would potentially just build a new building? Like, do we want to follow Les's recommendation to have someone give us plans for new buildings?
Sorry, was that
Because I think,
Well,
just- I think you would
the
have to
recommendation,
do that.
it didn't go quite that far. The
Oh, okay, I
recommendation was
misread it.
more to just solicit some proposals
Oh,
for
right.
feasibility study so that you could look at not only what the capital needs might be, but you could also be looking at what the potential for renovation, expansion or new construction might be.
My recollection on that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going back a few years, but my recollection was that it would add, like to build a new building would add about $2 million a year to our overall budget with very little offsetting it. Which, is that correct, Laurie?
Yes.
So that's a challenge.
Also, we sort of put a pause on that, I believe, because until we have had a meaningful conversation about what students we are providing a school for and
Right.
what their education is going to look like. We don't know what we're trying to do. We don't know how to provide for them because we don't know who they are yet.
Right. And that's why our long-term
Right.
plan needs to be 1 year, this year, 3 years, 5 years, and then, on down the road.
But actually, when we discussed building a new building, the original amount was, this is pre-COVID, $40 million. Bill threw a number out there of $40 million, and I said to Bill, and he agreed that was just bare minimums. At 40 million.
No, it was.
Was it 40 million?
It was 40 million.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me, it was 40 million.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And seriously, if you think about it, if you're gonna build a whole new school now, you're not gonna want a $40 million school. And first off, lumber is way higher than it used to be, so it ain't gonna be $40 million just for, materials is gonna go up anyway. But, you're gonna wanna make it first-class state-of-the-art. You're not gonna wanna make it, cinder block walls and all this, no. If you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it right. You're gonna do it 100% renewable, you're gonna do it green, you're gonna have charging stations outside for your buses, okay? And I'm serious, if you're gonna do it, you do it right.
Solar.
That's right. Get a solar field out there. I know where there's one sitting in the district right now.
Yeah, right. Well, Kenny, you bring up a good point about, you're making me think about what should we petition the state for next, right? We've already pushed them really hard in the weighting study, and now we're actually almost seeing that to fruition now. The next step would be like, let's get all other states chip in something for new buildings. Why can't Vermont do that? Right? We're at zero, right?
We can help them spend that $100 million.
Right?
I would spy a little bit on what Burlington's going through right now with a $181 million high school.
Without any support from the state.
Yeah, so it's just kind of see if they go green or.
And historically, there was support, wasn't there? It's been removed for maybe a decade or two.
Yeah, it was a high percentage too, back in I think it was like 2012, it was like 50% or something like that.
And where are you gonna build that school?
Yeah, that's the other part.
Are you gonna build it on a spot where it's sandy underneath and it gives way to the beams? No, we know we don't wanna do that, right?
You don't want to put it
Very true, very true. All right, folks, it is now 8:30, but great questions, great conversation. Let's go on to the survey results.
So, yeah, we have two other things to cover. One is the survey, and the other is enrollment. And Suzanne, I know you had asked about those graphs and whether we could get those into the PowerPoint, and I wasn't able to do that. And I wonder if you would be able and willing to share your screen and maybe talk a bit through the graphs before we get into the comments?
I sure can do that as long as I have sharing rights from Paugh, probably.
Yep, try it now, Suzanne.
I think yours is closer to Windham.
Got everything in there.
There we go.
Yeah. Fair.
I got them this week.
Now you're trying to see down there.
I can't see down there.
I mean, it's better than the alternative. Is Suzanne talking? Suzanne, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we.
Table it till the next meeting.
Oh, yeah, I was totally muted. 1 second, let me try that.
I'm sure it sounded great to you.
I haven't Zoomed long, I'm really out of practice. Okay, so anything. Here it is, it lives a couple clicks away on the future planning page. 178 members responded. There were basically 3 questions. Where do you live? Are you a parent, community member, a future parent, a teacher, something else? And so you can see below here, it shows what those other people wrote in, what they were. And some of them, like they said they were other, but they lived in Williamsville, which is technically Hastings. So you kind of see it a little blurry there. And then the one question that was asked was, I would like the future planning board to pursue a plan that includes a pre-K through 12th grade model, or a pre-K through 8th model, it's the red, pre-K through 12th is pink, and then that light lavender is other. And so there's the breakdown of percentages of what people responded to. And then if you scroll down a tiny bit more, you'll see that those that wrote other were somewhat choosing A and B, actually. Some were saying remain the same, change nothing, which I would assume means a pre-K through 12. So you kind of have to weed through that a little bit and sort of add things back onto both sides. It's pretty, I would say, after looking through it, it's pretty evenly distributed going to both sides. So I don't think the percentage is super different. And then below that is this, which is the big, it's a huge spreadsheet of every comment that was received of the 178 respondents, which is vibrant and amazing to go through, but there's so many. So Les has kind of condensed them a bit, and I think he's gonna go through that part.
Yeah, not exactly condensed them. I've just pulled out a couple of things.
Pulled out some of that kind of illustrate the general.
Yeah, which, I think we can talk about it together. But it would be very helpful immediately, I think, for the task force members to read through those comments and to be familiar with what folks are saying there, and for all the board members really to read through those comments. It gives you a lot of insight on what's on people's minds. But the challenges interpreting and responding to that, I think are going to be evident in just a minute. And Bob, could you pull the PowerPoint back up here? So I want to give you an example of a couple of things that were said.
Oh, it's because Bob's controlling. Sorry. Page 9, Bob.
Stop clicking.
No. Oh,
Not getting-
not going there.
For anyone.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to advance it. Yeah, let's go back to
This one?
that one. Yeah. So here, for instance, is one comment. And I'll read this since it may not be legible for everyone. I support 9 through 12 choice with full choice, including private independent schools such as BBA. This is a significant value to our community's children. Choice will also make our towns more desirable to new and young families. Everyone can see the declining population and enrollment in our community. This is a way to change that. Look at the towns around us. Every one of them offers some level of choice. This is why families move to those towns and not our towns. So, give you a minute just to kind of think about that for a second, and then I want to share a couple of other comments. Now, here are two more. We looked at different communities based on their educational structures and chose West River Valley because LNG offered interesting programs and had a smaller and more community-minded atmosphere. I think not only would a brain drain occur when LNG employees lose their jobs and quite possibly have to move out of the area, but you'd be losing a high school, which tends to tie communities together. Would families want to move here? And then another comment. I urge you to look beyond the emotional reactions and look towards what would build and revitalize our community. Time and time again, when a high school closes, a community dies. A vibrant K-12 education system is a cornerstone for any community. Leland and Gray can be, and I would say already is, a pillar of our community, bringing together the people of our towns. This in turn keeps people living in the area, which in turn keeps the local economy going. While the sense of community a K-12 school creates is undeniably an emotional tie, it is also an economic driver and a source of stability in the lives of local residents. Now, their comments, those comments were offered by 3 different people. And consider the contrast between the first screen and the second screen. So, you know, as we're thinking through this process and coming to a decision, how do you begin to evaluate some of the assumptions in these comments? So the question about choice and choice versus what the first respondent called full choice. Does choice exist now?
9 through 12.
Yeah,
And,
state.
and what does that look like? What is the choice that's available to folks?
I think
right now.
You can choose.
They can come to Leland and Gray. That's their
Any
choice.
public school in the state of Vermont.
So any high school student in the state can attend any high school in the state?
Any
Is that-
Public.
Public high school. And how does that occur if someone wanted to do that?
There's an application process that students engage in early February. They apply to, they have to have a form signed off by their school that they're currently going to, and then that gets signed and sent to the school of choice that they're trying to get into. School boards set limits, it can set limits around how many can exit, how many can enter. And some schools have very small numbers, and so they cap it. And if they have a large number of school choice applications, they do a lottery system. And some schools don't have that many coming in, so it's just whoever applies gets in. You cannot discriminate against any of the usual reasons for excluding a student in choice. And families have to provide their own transportation.
Okay. How does that play out here at LNG?
Yeah, what are the numbers here?
Well, they're really low in both directions. We'll get a couple that come typically from the Grafton, Athens area. And we'll get a couple that go out typically to Brattleboro. And that's pretty much it. When I say a couple, I mean in the 9 through 12 right now, there might be 4 total for all 4 grades that exited and maybe 4 that came in, something like that. It usually is pretty even, but it's usually really small.
But you said there's a certain number that can come in and a certain number that can come out.
Yeah, it's like 30.
So it's 30.
It's something like, I mean, you guys set it every year.
Right,
You guys
so-
set that by board
So
statute.
in reality, not every student has choice. If we can only let 30 kids go, then only 30 kids have choice. In reality.
Yeah, the exiting number, I think it's the incoming number that's set by that you set by statute, or a minimum based on a percentage. I'd have to look back at what the statute says, but every year the board is supposed to set those numbers, those caps. And to be honest, I'm not sure if you guys did that this year.
Do we pay full tuition?
So nobody goes anywhere.
Well, no, people are still able to apply, it doesn't really limit that, but that's part of the compact that exists. No money follows the kid.
Right.
Unless there's special education attached. And the school of origin keeps the ADM, I believe, is that right?
School of origin.
School of origin keeps the ADM. So obviously if you break even in and out, there's zero impact financially and there's zero impact with kid counts.
4 was the number? About?
I mean, I could
Averaging.
get more accurate, but I mean, that's my guess at the top of my head.
Thanks. Very small.
Yep.
And that was contrasted with what the first writer called full choice, which included some form of tuition voucher.
And the ability to
Private
achieve, and the ability to achieve private schools.
Yeah. And that person also said many of the surrounding towns do that.
It's more geared toward that's a Jamaica resident because Floodbrook has choice of high school to go, Green Mountain, Burton, Long Trail, VA. Windham has that choice. So it would be more up at that end or on the lower end, maybe down in Williamsville or something. Not so much Dover, but, well,
Does nobody run as well?
but, yeah.
They don't have a designated school, I don't believe.
No, they don't, but usually up in that neck of the woods, it's offered, but our kids are to come here because we're part of the district.
The topography is a huge factor in this. I mean, there's east to west in the state, in the southern part of the state. If you take Bells Falls out of that factor, it's because it's a little further north. There's 4 high schools. I mean, it's Burton, you got Mount Anthony, Bennington, Brattleboro, and us. And Green Mountain's kind of up there floating around too, but you got to cross the mountain either way. There's no, I guess I forgot Twin Valley, but that, again, they're so isolated as well geographically that no one goes that direction either.
Yeah, you got to travel. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds the choice off is travel and paying for your own transportation, so.
Which is why we get a lot of the Grafton and Athens kids.
Yeah.
Because it's close, it's nearby.
But they're coming there, their parents are coming this way for work.
Would there be any value in looking at some of the other towns in the SU and sort of where the kids go and how that might impact different families? Imagine I've heard several people speak to the challenges around transportation here. And I would imagine that would impact some families much more heavily than others.
Yeah, I don't know.
Wardsboro usually ships their kids here, right?
Not as much lately. I don't
Only a
think.
few, yeah.
It's been dwindling. They are going to Brattleboro, BBA.
I know Dover does BBA because they all meet in Stratton.
And a lot of Brattleboro.
Well, Brattleboro too.
So then the other significant thing that was raised here, well, there are two things. One was the impact of the school on community, on creating a community, having community space. And the other was the economic impact of the school in the community. Is there a way of looking at either or both of those things? So that, again, that could be more widely understood.
How?
Yeah.
How?
Well, I mean,
I was just going to say, so I think maybe at the heart of this is that the folks that were interested in choice and our question on the survey may not have completely understood that what we were trying to get at in the survey was, yes, we already have choice. So what we're saying is that Leland and Gray would close, there would not be a high school choice. You would be tuitioning out to another one of these other schools. And I think that was lost on folks. Mm-hmm. Sure, choice, as Bob said, yeah, we'll have a handful of kids that go one way or the other in and out. But what we were really trying to decide was, do we want to have a pre-K through 12 program here? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then are we tuitioning out, being a non-operating district and for high school and sending them out? And there are many pitfalls to that. And, you know, as Bob described, some of the lottery system. What if all of a sudden the lottery system fills up for Brattleboro? Sorry, you're number 31. You can't go.
Yeah, I don't know that would fall. If we were closed, it would be straight tuition dollars. It wouldn't be lottery system. That would be a different avenue of access. But
we'd lose our say in how our education goes.
Right.
You're just one of the minions.
You just choose which building to occupy and hope that they're doing what you would like them to do.
Yeah.
But that's the
Where
amount
here
of
they
say
have a
yes.
say.
Yeah.
You have a board to come to say that tuition out, you're amongst many.
And like Al said, that particular question was a little confusing because I did hear that from some people that said that they actually answered the question incorrectly for what they believed, you know, when they realized afterwards and the survey was closed. So, just put that out there.
I'll take the hit on that for being unclear.
Crystal Corview has her hand up.
Go ahead, Crystal.
So I actually wasn't on the board at the time the survey was put out. And I was kind of confused, like, why are we saying a K through 8 option with 9 through 12 choice when we already offer choice? So when I did the survey, I thought to myself, are they saying, you know, 9 through 12, you can choice to Leland and Gray, or you can choice to like BBA or Vermont Academy. So I think we need to be clear about if we go to a K through 8 model, is private and independent schools on the table?
I mean, Dover and Wardsboro, Stratton, other towns within our SU to access those. I will say this, when you're dealing with private schools though, there's an application process. Mm-hmm. And they have the right to not accept students, even if they're coming with tuition dollars. Whereas the Brattleboros and Bells Falls and Green Mountains might be a little bit different in how they approach that. But there will be an application process and some of our kids may not get in some of those situations. So just that's something to consider as well. But yes, that's what it was describing.
I'm wondering if the administration perhaps could put together a list of Vermont schools, or even regional or some qualifier, but maybe Vermont schools that have closed, or Vermont towns that have closed their high schools, and what that meant. Like, what happened? So they closed, they said, okay, we're gonna choice. It meant these number of people, this is how far people had to travel. I mean, I guess that's maybe irrelevant because of how widespread our district is, so it's not gonna be comparable. But I'm wondering if there was like this talk about, economic drivers and, schools being the lifeblood of a community. I believe that that is true. And I don't have data to back it up, but I've been to this school events, and I've stood on the soccer field while the varsity girls played the state championship game and cheered with everybody else. And then the number of community people that are involved in that don't even have kids that go to the school, that are just, everybody from retirees to people that live in neighboring districts that have friends here. And it just brings people together in a way that is absolutely qualifiable. But I don't have data points per se. I don't know how you come up with data points for that sort of thing. But I do believe that both of those things are true, that having a high school is both an economic driver and a community driver for quality of life. I don't know how to qualify that. I'm hoping somebody will jump in with an idea, but I do believe those things are true.
Patty Dixon has her hand up. Maybe she has an idea.
Wow, me, Patty. Let's hear it.
Well, I don't know that I have an idea, but I think one statistic that might be helpful is the numbers of and the whys of, we have families who live in our towns and do not send their kids to our schools. That's, to me, an important number and an important fact-finding thing as to why do you not send your children to our schools? You live here, you pay taxes, but you do not send your kids to our schools.
Just for clarification, are you talking about homeschool? Are you talking about private schools?
Yes.
Both.
Both. Homeschool and private school.
Is it possible to survey those families
And other
directly?
public schools.
Anybody who's
And other public schools, sorry.
Anybody who's choosing to opt out of our system, whether that means they're paying tuition elsewhere or homeschooling, or I guess those are the two choices.
Yeah, and we've had people talk, and I've met people who have moved from their home in Jamaica and gone half a mile up the road to be where they can have school choice, and sold a house and bought a house. And I do have to say, one of the problems that I know from people I talk to at Stratton, it's a perception thing. When I've asked people, because I have someone who, their dream house, they found it in Jamaica, but they aren't going to buy it because they wouldn't want to send their kids to our schools. And I asked, can I ask you why? What is your reason for not wanting to send your kids to our school? And what I really got was, well, somebody told me I didn't want to, that I shouldn't do that. I really have never been in the schools. I don't know anything about it. And they were honest with me. So there's a real serious perception issue too that needs to be addressed.
Thanks, Patty. Back to our PR campaign.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Patty, you're right, perception is reality. I have two thoughts for you, dear lady. The first one is how to validate, or data point you keep calling, which I don't believe data points are the be all and end all of any educational experience. But how you validate that would be to have events that people come to, like you said, the soccer game, alum gatherings. There's a lot of ideas I could present to, if I'm on the task committee. And the second one is, exit strategies are used in other places. When students graduate, part of their requirement to get their diploma is to fill out an exit strategy. You know, would you send your kids here? Are you gonna leave town? Get some of that feedback from those kids and from alums too. If you had alum events, they could certainly be asked then. Just two ideas in response to your comments.
Suzanne has her hand up.
Thank you, Peter. Go ahead, Suzanne.
I was wondering if I can share my screen one more time. I just want to show everybody where there's some information that I kind of compiled about school choice that the old long-term planning committee sort of already did, just so that we don't redo the work. Okay, can I do that?
Sure.
Okay, 1 second.
If Bob allows it.
I think it's.
He's already allowed me. All right. So if you go to future planning, all the way at the bottom here is a dive deeper button here. And this has a lot of stuff. It's got Act 46 stuff, school choice stuff, and immersive learning information. And if you click that, there's a whole thing here that says school choice, and it kind of explains the difference between public high school choice and tuition. And then it also has comparisons of other Vermont schools and their populations and their structures, our anticipated enrollments, projected enrollments, and then an interview that I think Bill did with a principal of Floodbrook, I think, about their closing of their high school, which was kind of a personal anecdote.
Ludlow, I think that was.
And a map of public high schools and then tuitions of various schools in the state. Just in terms of you guys not doing extra work. It's all here, some of it.
That's great. Thanks, Suzanne.
So it sounds like this is, again, you know, one of the challenges that we've touched on a few times here is that the information is there, but how to pull it together in a, you know, a clear and accessible way. You know, that's the narrative that Suzanne just showed us probably explains some of the things that Bob explained to us at the beginning of this conversation. It might be a little bit more challenging to look at some of the individual documents there. And if someone or a group of folks could take that on and consolidate that information and put that in a prominent place on the website, you know, that might help to address that.
Just a quick, isn't that the task of the secondary task force, is to report out on that?
Could be.
I mean, one of the things that we were asked to talk about is the choice element, right? I mean, sort of the model, which I'm assuming is going to have pluses and minuses and the financial elements as well as the community and economic impacts. That's what I assume we'd be presenting out to you guys in June, right? Or am I misunderstanding that?
That'd be great.
Okay, I assumed we were already doing that, so I don't want you guys to repeat that work if we're already tasked with doing it. So.
It was great to get the input of 178 people, but that's just a drop in the bucket of the population of voters and people that live in our communities. I'm not comfortable making a decision on that small percentage. Either way. Yeah, I mean.
Right, and with the fact that it was misunderstood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Which was teased out in the comments fairly well, so, I mean, pretty strong support.
You even had one person say, we have choice, and does that include Leland and Gray?
Yes, not one of the choices.
Right.
In the same state, so it was like a contradiction to the question. So do you do another survey with a more, precise question? Or a more detailed question? Or do you just go with a plan and put it out, or put something out you want to get everybody out, put something out for a vote.
I was gonna say.
Okay, you put something out for a vote for the public, and then you're gonna, especially something that's this controversial, you're gonna get a bunch of people out. You're gonna have them coming to meetings. You think it was bad at our last meeting when we had a surprise guest? Try 50 of them. We'll have a ball.
But if we generally agree that that survey probably is not valid due to several different issues, how do we make sure we get input from a large portion of the community?
So
I think is the question, right? I mean,
I would, do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say that when you actually go through the 170 or whatever it is comments, you can actually get I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of like what people's intentions were, not necessarily what, not necessarily how they understood the survey, but what their intentions were, what their actual problems were, what their goals were, what their dreams were for our district. You could really tease that out pretty well through the comments. So I don't feel like it was wasted at all. I would say that putting those graphs out there in a very public way is not necessarily super beneficial because of the misunderstandings that were there. But I do think the comments were really helpful.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, but there was the comment that it's only 178 people. Like, do we feel like we have enough of the public's input on this issue?
I think that we've engaged a lot of public since that point. I mean, that was sort of the stepping off point of public engagement. And I think that all of the things that we're doing are a lot. And I would, again, I think we're all pretty open to doing all of the things that we can come up with for public engagement, but.
Yeah, and the PR hasn't stopped. I mean, the train's still moving.
The PR and, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think the other piece too that you have to remember is that the example we gave earlier about people not knowing what we do is our own, it's our own fault, but I mean, that's the danger of this. So getting more input until we can actually inform the public might be better to wait. And some of those public sessions that you have set for June and September might be the opportunities to collect information at those points once we've been able to share out like what actually is happening and what actually is the impact of closing a school, and have some of that information ready, then people can weigh in, but at least be informed weighing in, versus now where you have this survey question, whatever, that they understand or not, but they also don't even know what we do, so it's kind of hard to say, are they actually making an informed decision if the data was even accurate in the first place? So I think that's something to think about. But I think we'll have that opportunity. I think that's what we're going to report out in June and see where you guys want to go at that point. But
Well, I have a question. How would that work in reality? Because if you're going to, if you decided just, okay, we decided because we said we're going to have to put a lot of stock into, if the people are going to come out and comment and put their input in on the website and take the surveys, are we going to listen to their point of view? Or are we going to throw it aside or assume we know what they're talking about when they fill it out and say, oh, that one doesn't count?
Ken, I don't think anybody said we're going to throw it aside.
Right, I know. That's what I'm saying. So this is my
said
point.
that we looked at the commentary.
Okay.
The commentary.
We looked
really
at the comments, but we're saying, but we're not going to put this out. We're not going to do this. We're already having bias.
Well,
already.
Maybe there's a middle ground there.
That's where I'm getting at.
Yeah, and you need to be careful that you're not just doing a PR exercise and trying to, smooth over the concerns. But to be doing an honest reflection of, here's what we're doing, and also be thinking about, here's what else we can do. And, if that's out there, then people will, I think, be more willing to say, okay, this board recognizes that we want to see a little bit more here, and they have some plans, and let's,
But if we come out, what I'm saying is, if we come out and say, okay, 53%, according to the survey, say, we want full choice 9 through 12. And then, so do we have to, we're closing the high school? Because we'll probably move the kids back to the other elementary schools and fill them back up. And that's how we would, that would probably be how that plan would go. So if this building would close, then we would have to do a vote anyway, and then we'd find out what the people wanted anyway, through the vote.
It would have to have a vote at all 5 towns in the
That's
affirmative,
right.
right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Which I find.
And then you would get everybody out. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
If you're gonna do it, you gotta have a vote.
Thanks, Ken.
So,
go ahead.
yeah, we actually have two other things here to cover. The elementary principals have put together an overview of curriculum instruction, assessment, and so special programs at each of the buildings. And I think Scotty and Craig had worked on that. So I wonder if one of you or both of you could just fill us in on what you found.
Yeah, hey everybody, happy Monday night. It's good to see everybody again. I shut my video off because I live in the middle of the woods and it's raining. But,
Enough said.
You know, looking at the document that Scotty and I created over the last month, the structure looks pretty fractured if you were to do a quick look at it. But to me, there's a lot of growth that is shown there. So when I came in 5 years ago, we were starting to have the conversations about curriculum, professional development, about unifying curriculum. And looking at that document, as I mentioned, it seems to be all over, but read it, you find that there's a lot of the same things there. Right? So whether it's at Townsend Elementary or Newbrook or Jamaica, we're talking foundations for an early literacy program. Core math instruction has been Eureka for the last 4 or 5 years. So all those things are the same platforms, the digital platforms that we use for differentiation and enrichment, the IXLs, the ZERNs. Those things are becoming standard, and they're standard conversations that are happening at leadership. And we're investing money and PD into it. The extra things like winter sports have all unified this year. So, and part of that was from COVID and what we're actually able to offer and do, but the collaboration that's happening between Scotty and myself, it is all about equity and equality. And it shows a lot in this spreadsheet that we have. And again, that's a long 5 years of growth, led by Dr. Jen Cusick, our curriculum coordinator, to unify everything that we have. And there's value there to that. We really want, if students go from one place to another, whether that's year to year or mid-year, that we're picking up right where that student left off in a scope and sequence. And we're doing the best that we can for both the teachers professional development wise, but also where the students are developmentally. So there's a lot of overlapping and same things that we have there. And it's just really nice to see, although visually it doesn't seem connected.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig?
Sounds like it's pretty equitable.
Agreed.
Just a question that may be more specific to Jamaica because of the size of the student population and the multi-graded classrooms there. Would you say there's more of an emphasis on personalized, more individualized education there than at other schools?
Les, that's a great question. And I may surprise you with this answer. And the answer that I have is no. The reason for that is the professional development that we've been through as a district for our teachers is all about instructing to current levels of every student. Certainly there is an advantage that classrooms have with the lower numbers to provide a higher level of differentiation. But at this point in time, all of our teachers, I I would say I confidently have worked within a workshop model. This past March, our academic support teachers led math curriculum in math menus, which is just another level of differentiation for student choice. So they're all getting that same professional development in an equitable way.
Thanks, Craig.
Can I ask a question about that, actually?
Yeah.
I know we've talked as a board in the past about having real individualized learning plans, like actual individualized learning plans for every student, in a way, as a way to gauge that every child is sort of moving up at their maximum abilities, wherever they're starting from. And I'm wondering, with the professional development that's been going on and all the work that's been happening and at trying to meet every student where they're at, how close are we to something like that? And how well do you feel like we are, as a district, doing, or I guess at least at the elementary level, at really meeting every kid where they're at, and also moving every kid up at their own personal best?
I love that question, and I really do. And again, part of the 5 years that I've been in the district, I've seen a lot of that growth. I'll only speak to my building because that's the experiences I have, the teachers that I have are my experience, the walkthroughs that I have are my experience, the SBAC scores, the benchmark scores, the data reviews are my experiences. I can't speak to Scotty's JPS experience, and I can't speak to Newbrook's experience. But I'd say we're really very close with the near 100 students that we have at Townsend to having individualized learning plans. And we talk about where's the entry level for every student when we create lesson plans or we're going into a new unit. What is their level of understanding to get them in? And then where is their exit? How are we going to take them from where they enter to where they need to be? And it doesn't have to be showing the understanding. And I think you put it really nicely when you said like the level of growth for the individual. We want to get them there. We want to have everybody have the same entrance with a differentiation that they can understand, but move them along to get to where they need to be for an understanding of content. And I can say that we're really very close, and we're getting closer because as I talked about that professional development that happened in March, there was a difference in schools and the teachers that were doing it of their experiences with specifically math menu and math board, things that were happening every single day, multiple times, or every single day or every week. But we are getting there, and that's the real advantage of creating these experiences through professional development and giving teachers the opportunity to learn from each other, because students will get the best opportunities when the teachers learn the best ways to differentiate.
And just as a follow-up to that, having heard questions from some of the public about in general feeling like maybe the quality or the perceived quality, I should say, of our district's education is somewhat lacking, do you feel like the students on the higher end and the students on the lower end are both being challenged to their, again, that sort of individualized level?
Great question again, and I'm going to speak just from my experiences.
Sure, of course.
And yes, I do. Having those frequent data check-ins and really understanding where the kids' levels are and giving student choice, that's the biggest thing. To appropriately challenge them and give them choice, they get an opportunity to show what they know at every single level. If we're talking enrichment, we're talking about give me more. And if we're talking about students who need tiered support, we're talking about let's just make some benchmarks to show what you know, right? Like what's the growth that you have? we are really very, very close to having that happen in every class and every subject. And again, it's getting better because we're all learning from each other.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Good question.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Craig. That was great.
And then last but not least, Bill has some enrollment data, just the trends and projections that he's going to share. And Bill, I did put some of those tables up here, so these are the right ones.
Awesome. So I can just talk and I don't have to worry about sharing my screen. I appreciate that, Les. So this is elementary for going back to 2018. So it's real last 5 years and then anticipated 2023. And as you guys know, we have school choice that happens in March. And so after March, we get requests of people who didn't make the school choice or moved in, and according to the board's policy, as long as there is room, those requests can be considered. So sometimes you'll see these numbers change. So I just want you guys to know that 23 could become 24, that 85 could become 84. We won't know until we actually start school next fall. But trend-wise, you can see that in the big change happened between 2019 and 2020. 3 major things happened at that time. We had 6th grade moved to Leland and Gray, and we had consolidated pre-K in Townsend, and we had intra-district school choice. And so the change from 2019 to 2020 reflects the biggest change of all of those 3 things happening simultaneously. After that happens, it's pretty consistent. Kind of the biggest change is you'll see in Townsend that over the last 3 years, just 15 less students. And that is indicative of less students overall. If you kept the average of 27 that we have per grade in the grades in 20, 21, 22, and 23, you would see a 10% decline from 2018 to 2023, a total of 250 to a total of 225. You have to imagine that you're still counting 6th grade. So it's good data to have, kind of shows you where the big shift was and then where things are moving going forward. But essentially, we're running 3 elementary schools for 200 elementary age students. So that's kind of my narrative about this slide. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Just to be clear, Bill, the numbers that we're looking at here for Jamaica and Newbrook are K through 5, and for Townsend are pre-K through 5?
That is correct.
Thanks, Bill. We ready to?
Do you have the next slide?
Oh boy.
Bingo. All right, so you guys have this in your packet, and but in general, what this shows is that the West River Education District, looking forward, and of course things change. It's very hard to make really hard, solid predictions, but we are averaging about 27 students per class. We could have 24 in one, we could have 32 in one, but on average, we're about 27 students per class. So you can see in the top of the cross, you have the projections for the entire district. FY22 at 474 goes down to 390 in FY29. Again, that's if everything remained constant of an average of 27. we all know that kids move in and out. But it does give you an idea that the slide I'll show you last, we're going from about 600 kids to 400 kids over a period of, I believe, 18 years. So that's important to know as we think about structure and we think about where we want students to be and how to operate schools when they are placed in different locations. The middle row is the 3 elementary schools. And you can see that Newbrook averages about 10, and Jamaica averages about 5, and Townsend averages about 12, and as Les pointed out, that also includes, pre-K in the Townsend arena. But you can see where Jamaica looks pretty constant, around 20 to 30. Newbrook drops pretty significantly, 87 to 60, and Townsend 64 to 72. But again, I would point you to the top one because that's really the one that's talking about the whole district. To me, the most powerful ones in these estimate predictions are the top one and the bottom one. Top because you're doing a larger amount of data points for averages. Bottom because those are our actual kids. Because Leland and Gray hosts 6 through 12, we know the K through 5 right now. And we're just projecting those 4-year-olds up through the system. So you can see in Leland and Gray, you lose 72 students over that period of time. Which, if you look back up at the West River, you're losing 84 over that period of time. And again, caveat, caution. These are predictions for the future. We're not looking at real data from the past. But it does mirror, when we go to the next slide, of what has happened the previous decade.
So I don't think we had that.
I can share it if Bob gives me credit.
Go for it.
All right. You guys can see that?
Kinda.
No? You can't?
Yeah, we got it. Just fine print.
Starting at 61, 41.
All right, so you look at what happened there in 2013 to 2022. And, you got a couple COVID years in there in FY21 and 22. So you can see that significant decrease from 20 to 22.
Can you read off some numbers for us blind people in the back?
Far left to far right.
Sure, so it starts with 2013 and goes to 2022, so you're looking at a decade. And it starts at 661 and it ends at 471, a decrease of 190 or 19 students per year for a decade.
Ouch.
And that 471 goes down to 390 over the next 7 years. So if you look at it over 17 years, you're going from 661 to about 390, which is a loss of 270 students over 17 years. So I guess my big takeaway from this as we think about long-term planning is that we have less students. And by going through this process for a third time, you have an opportunity to think about how you want physical structure to match the number of students that we serve. And that's what I got for you.
Thanks, Bill. That was really helpful. I just had this wild thought. All right, so that's 10 years snapshot, and then we have a little projection forward. But I'm just almost wondering, I mean, that's a generation, right? 20 years, call it. What do we look like over the last 50 years, right? You know, do we have, all we've seen in that is that data is down, right? Was there ever, like, was that the peak? Or, you know, I'm just trying to figure that out. I don't know if that's easy to
Well,
define.
large companies were around in Brattleboro. CNS had full complement, GS Precision. There was industry. There was jobs. Economics, what drives it. Where are young people going? They're going out west. They're going to Montana.
I think we peaked 20, 25 years
Yeah.
ago, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from what I've heard anecdotally, I don't know, you know, what your graduating class was, but you know, what I've been told is like in the 70s and early 80s, it was in the around 40-ish, which is
50.
roughly what we have right about now, but it definitely went up. It peaked when those guys were in school, and then it went right back down.
One was the largest graduating class.
Yeah.
I had about 50 in my graduating class year.
So, yeah, I mean, I think there was a boom, and then there was a brought back down to earth, and then it appears to be kind of dwindling from earth. Yeah. But yes, I think it is part, the bigger picture, I think there's an up and a down.
And then as Dana was just saying, what are some of the factors that were involved in that? Is there the ability to, you know, start that climb back up again? And how could we contribute to that?
Bring jobs back.
I mean, Vermont as a whole, how much have they lost population-wise?
Yeah.
I think the declining students is a national thing, right? I mean, the baby boomers have had their boom and they're not producing kids anymore, and it's less kids in general, right? I mean, I've seen that it's a nationwide issue.
It's too expensive to have kids.
And Al, if I could just comment, one element of this that I think bears just thinking about from the standpoint of this. Now I can't see it, but if you look at the bottom, the senior class of Leland and Gray, I believe it's 30-something, 8.
Yeah.
38. And then when you look across to the end projection year, it's like 31. And just to highlight, when you think about that, so like the senior English class, for example, and how staffing is impacted, a difference of 38 to 31, it's a big drop as far as like revenue from the ADM or the equalized pupil counts and all that, but it isn't a big drop in staffing needs when you think about it from that standpoint. So, you know, that dropped to 24, maybe, or 20, you know what I mean? But in the 30s, you're still talking about, I still need 2 sections of senior English, whether it's 38 or 31. Really anywhere from 45 to 24. So there's an economy of scale you get with the bigger numbers, but just as we think about those things, and it goes back to the question Peter asked at the beginning, is why does it get more expensive the fewer kids you have? And that's why. There's a range. Yeah. And you hit another point, and then all of a sudden you can drop. But, you know, just something to think about from a scheduling standpoint that people probably don't consider, but like that's the world I live in, and thinking about what do I have to offer the kids, and how many sections of what do I need, and how many staff you need to run those sections, and all that. So something to think about.
No, that makes perfect sense, right? If you drop 2.8% in population, you can't drop necessarily 2.8% in.
They're not all sophomores, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's spread between the second grades, and then, you know, I think the number that Bill said, something, it was like two kids or something per year, per kid, per whatever. So if you spread that out, it was a 7, whatever the number was. I in my head I thought, well, that's like 2 kids from each grade. Well, that doesn't change anything really from a staffing perspective, but it does change things significantly from a funding perspective. So,
How do you offer AP classes for 2 students when you normally have 10, 12? But then you only have 2 students that do AP. But
and then you're getting into the breadth that we're offering. Do we offer it anyways? Because we have families that won't stay if you don't offer it. I mean, there's a complicated thing that goes into this, and I'm happy. I've offered this to boards for years. I'm happy to like do a whole thing on scheduling so you guys can understand like what's involved at the high school level. It's apples and oranges. In fact, it's apples and pomegranates. It's not even close. It's probably apples and skunks. It's not even. There's no comparison between the elementary how you schedule and it is at the secondary level. It's just very, very different. So.
Apples and automobiles.
There you go.
There you go. Maybe you should give us that presentation.
Yeah.
Anytime you guys want me to do that, I mean, I can share that out with the task force, that we can talk about that could be a factor in that, so they can understand it well as well, and be able to articulate that would be good. So.
Well, that might be good to explain out to the people, because they don't normally get that.
Right, but even something like what I just said, the difference between 38 and 31, people get that, people understand that, you know?
Yeah.
Those kinds of just simple factoids, I think, will have an impact on people when you think about funding, and as Laurie was talking earlier about the numbers, the reason that it's more expensive to teach, to run secondary school is for that nature, but the flip side of that is the equalized pupil is worth more, secondary students, it's a bigger number, which is why. That's how it all comes together.
Is it possible to have somebody basically put maybe like little narrative bullet points or something on some of these documents that I'm sure the public is gonna wanna look at, and they're not necessarily gonna say, well, they're gonna say, well, 38 to 31, I mean, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, or, oh, wow, that feels like a big deal, but maybe some kind of qualifier of a narrative of what that, how, the most big impact of that. I don't know who that is. But somebody might want to do that.
I know what you're saying. So maybe just something like notes and assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, an easy assumption on that one is that 27 will run
Things
all
to
the way across.
consider, or.
Which we may just visually see, but may need to be understood.
Maybe it's not part of the report that are coming out.
Not everybody's gonna have the ability to, read those the same way either, so.
Simple explanation.
And like not, judgmental, right? Just this is what it means.
Well, I serve with the pleasure of the board, so, well, at 9:30 on a Monday night,
It is such a pleasure.
super
I think we need to.
That's
Yeah.
But joy, thanks, Joe.
All right. What else has turn? Okay. Suzanne, you still out? Yes, you are. All right, community outreach. And you're off mute.
Yes, I did it. I think I went over most of it when Les did his timeline, so I think we're pretty good.
Okay.
Postcard should be coming out real soon, and someone had asked how we can find out if we're reaching people, and on the postcard there's a specific little thing called a QR code. Someone can hover their phone camera over it and immediately sign up for a contact list and get on emails and even text message alerts, so we can find out if people are interested just by that, so that can give us some data. So we'll see what happens with it. It should be coming through later this week.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Is there another way, Suzanne, for those who don't have QR?
Yeah, that's on the website as well.
Okay.
I'm up. Page on the bottom.
You got the AV code?
You guys pin cups in the string?
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne.
I am that generation.
All right, let's move on to this last one here. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of April 4th.
So
22
moved.
meeting.
And seconded.
All right. I don't think we have any folks out there, so we can do it here.
Crystal.
Oh, I'm sorry, Crystal. Wow, sorry about that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Crystal?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, Mike, it's unanimous. Appears to be unanimous. It is unanimous. Motion carries.
Before you do anything like adjourn, just your next meeting date on here, I think, is incorrect.
Yes, that is true.
It is.
It is incorrect. Good catch. It's the 6th.
June 6th. All right.
D-Day.
And on that note, I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
Mike?
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.